today's tough question, and I just put the poll out on Twitter if you guys want to check it out and vote. We have 2 stories up. Even though he's on vacation, Dave, in his rock star style, managed to write 2 stories about 2 standout players for Tennessee football right now. One, they were both newcomers last year, but in different ways. One was a newcomer, one was a transfer. The newcomer is Bru McCoy. The freshman was Dylan Sampson. The transfer was Bru McCoy. Today's tough question is, who will be a bigger explosive star this year? Bru McCoy or Dylan Sampson? Now, Bru McCoy, many scouts say, is probably the best pro prospect for Tennessee football on offense this year. On top of that, Tennessee football just had a Biletnikoff Award winner. We talk all the time about the way Josh Heupel's system benefits quarterbacks. We don't talk a lot about how much more it benefits receivers. 2 separate 1,000-yard receivers the past 2 years, Cedric Tillman and Jalin Hyatt. Both are about to be NFL draft picks. Bru McCoy could be that next guy this year. Heck, last year, he caught 52 passes for 667 yards, and that was his first year with Tennessee. So there's a lot of potential. However, as Dave reports, Dylan Sampson has been explosive this spring. It's been absolutely impossible to ignore just how big of a deal Dylan Sampson has been in the spring. The coaches can't hide it. The running backs coach, Jerry Mack, has been unable to hide it. Josh Heupel's been unable to hide it. It's beyond clear that the only reason Dylan Sampson did not see more action last year was that he had struggled to pick up some pass protection schemes. We saw that with the LSU game. He gave up a block, allowed Hendon Hooker to get sacked, fumble the ball, but Dylan Sampson showed his athleticism on that same play because he recovered the fumble himself and turned it into a gain of nothing when it should have been about a 10-yard loss. Dylan Sampson is a potential superstar. He's going to be the all-purpose back. He will not be the workhorse back. Jabari Small is going to be the workhorse back. Jalen Wright might split time with Jabari Small as the workhorse back. Maybe Cam Seldon will get some reps there. Khalifa Keith is going to be the power back, assuming he arrives ready to go in the fall. But Dylan Sampson, guys, I think is going to be the all-purpose back. Last year, he had 58 carries for 397 yards and 6 touchdowns, averaging nearly 7 yards a carry. And that was with him being limited because of his inability to pick up pass protection. If he's picked up pass protection, we could be looking at a budding superstar. I think he's going to take Jalen Wright's spot as the all-purpose back. I think that's why the coaches have asked Jalen Wright to put on more pounds to maybe be another feature back alongside Jabari Small. So the question remains, 2 guys who showed flashes last year, expected to play larger roles this year. Who's going to be a bigger breakout star for Tennessee football who hasn't flown under the radar because they were productive last year? Bru McCoy at wideout or Dylan Sampson at running back? I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb. I'm going to say Dylan Sampson at running back. Now, I know what Josh Heupel's offense has done for Tennessee football receivers the past 2 years, and Bru McCoy is a special case. I think Joe Milton's play, though, is more dependent on the slot and the speedy receivers. We saw that last year with Squirrel White. Squirrel White was Joe Milton's favorite target, balled out. We're going to have Josh Ward on. I'm going to concede to him. I conceded to Dave earlier in the week. I'm pretty sure that Squirrel White I thought Dante Thornton was going to take the slot spot away from Squirrel White. I was dead wrong on that. Doesn't mean Dante Thornton still can't play a huge role. He could play wide out and slot, kind of operate in between those, but looks like Squirrel White's going to be the star there. I think the existence of Squirrel White, provided Bru McCoy stays healthy, you're going to see the ball spread out a lot more evenly this year than you did last year. And I think Squirrel White's going to get the bulk of those catches in the offense with Joe Milton throwing the ball. I also think Tennessee's going to rely more heavily on the run game this year than they did last year. And part of that run game is going to be using the all-purpose backs more because Joe Milton can shoulder some of the load of the feature backs, which Jabari Small and they're hoping Jalen Wright will be, given his size. Taking all that into account, everything's set up for Dylan Sampson to have a massive, explosive season. We're talking maybe, guys, dare we invoke the name, the great Alvin Kamara? I'm just saying, it's possible. Let me go to the message board real quick and see what you guys think. Smoky Mountain Red says, I'm sorry, excuse me, let me go up. I'm going to actually start with Travis. Travis says Bru, and he also says Bru will be on the field every offensive snap. He's huge and so sure-handed. Travis, that's true. He will be on the field every offensive snap. I think Dylan Sampson's going to touch the ball on a higher percentage of times he's on the field, though, than Bru will when he's on the field. Again, yes, he'll be on the field every offensive snap, whereas you can only put one running back on the field. But this offense is usually a first read anyway. So a receiver being on the field every offensive snap with 4 other receivers or 3 other receivers, if they're not the first read, that's like being on the bench for a running back anyway. So I think, honestly, that's not as important. Remember, Ramel Keaton's still there on the other side, and he played a similar role to what Bru McCoy played last year. So even though I think, again, talking NFL, if I were drafting, if I had to pick one player from Tennessee right now to build my NFL future around, I would pick Bru McCoy, and I wouldn't even question it. His NFL draft potential is through the roof. But in this offense, I actually think it might be Dylan Sampson. John Hill says Bru has to rely on the quarterback. Sampson can bust the gaps and break tackles. That's a great point, John. We still don't know what to expect from Joe Milton this year. Everybody's talking about that Clemson game. I think Clemson played a soft coverage. And also, there were a lot of drives Tennessee didn't score on that game. We're overrating a lot of Milton's play in that game. He converted on some big plays to make sure there were enough drives where they did score, but he still missed on quite a few. So that's a great point by John. And by the way, you could say Dylan Sampson somewhat has to rely on the quarterback because you need Joe Milton's arm and his success through the air to open up the gaps, but you don't necessarily need that with Sampson because Joe Milton's running himself, his ability to run as a power runner at the quarterback position will open up things for Sampson. Smoky Mountain Red says, I want it to be Sampson. I think Bru will be solid no matter what. I could see that. Yeah, I think we kind of know what Tennessee's getting out of Bru McCoy, so we'll have to see where that goes. He says that, Smoky Mountain Red, you also say that I hope Sampson is the guy that comes in when a defense is gas and he busts a long run. That's what I think is going to happen. I think you're going to see a lot of Jabari Small, Joe Milton running the ball, both of them, wearing down a defense. You're going to see some big plays through the air on a couple of offensive drives, as you always do, and eventually the defense is going to be totally gassed, and that's when you will see Sampson. Probably I see like an opening drive of the third quarter. Hawkhead says I like Wright, though, a lot. I understand your point, Hawkhead, and I could be totally wrong, and Jalen Wright could still be a major impact player for Tennessee. Heck, he could become the new feature back. He and Jabari Small could both be a big deal together. They definitely alternated time last year, but Jalen Wright does have a lot of speed. So maybe Jalen Wright and Dylan Sampson will be the reason Dylan Sampson doesn't surpass Bru McCoy because they split time. But I'm just not so sure Jalen Wright has what Dylan Sampson has. Smoky Mountain Red says the height difference between Squirrel and Thornton is comical. I agree, Smoky Mountain Red. That's why I thought Dante Thornton was going to be the sure starter because a 6'5" slot guy in Josh Heupel's system, as I keep saying, seemed like Kevin Durant going to Golden State. But Squirrel hasn't given that spot up. He's been balling and looked every bit of what we thought he was at the end of last year. Mr. Jones says if the O-line can keep up the pace and block like they did last year, the running backs will have huge numbers this season. He also says Cam Seldon might be the rookie that has the best year and that there's a deep running back room, as many snaps per game as they have their touches to go around. Mr. Jones, you're right, but sometimes you have a rare athlete and you got to give them the ball more. We're not so sure with Cam Seldon. Dave and I talked about it, and I'm kind of on Dave's side. I think the Cam Seldon story has a little bit more to do with the fact that they're just trying him out because they don't know where to put him yet, and they're a little thin at running back. You don't use running backs too much in the spring. It's not a position that requires a lot of learning outside of pass protection, so it's more important to keep them healthy this time around. So I would just say be cautious with that. I think that Dylan Sampson still could end up getting the bulk of carries in this offense. And by the way, in Josh Heupel's offense, running backs don't need the bulk of carries because if you're the right running back in the right system at the right time, you can get a ton of yards no matter what.